The city was dying. Once the skyline of Vallos Secundis had shimmered with towering spires and glimmering walkways, a testament to the Zorg Confederacy's progress. Now, it was a graveyard. The war had swallowed it whole, leaving only burning skeletons of buildings, their shattered remains standing as monuments to what had been lost. Explosions had stopped. The battle had moved on, deeper into the heart of the planet, where armored divisions clashed in the name of governments that no longer cared for the people caught in between. And under the ruins of a collapsed home, Zena lay dying. She had been there for hours, crushed beneath heavy beams, the weight pressing against her legs like a vice. She had screamed at first, crying for help, her small hands clawing at the debris, trapping her. No one had come. At some point, she had stopped screaming. Pain dulled. The warmth of her own blood spread beneath her, and the edges of her vision pulsed with shadows. The body only fought for so long before it gave in. She didn't want to die. Her fingers twitched, reaching for something, anything. She tried to move again, but the sharp flare of pain shot through her abdomen, sending a weak cry past her lips. Footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, soldiers, Zorg soldiers. Zena's heart leapt. They came back for me. She turned her head, eyes barely able to focus through the blur of blood and exhaustion. Figures moved between the shattered remains of buildings, tall, armored, carrying plasma rifles. The symbol of the Zorg Confederacy was painted across their battle-worn chest plates. They were her people. She tried to speak. Her voice failed. She lifted a trembling hand. "Please." The soldiers moved past her. She barely understood. They didn't slow, didn't stop. Then one of them, the officer leading the patrol, hesitated. Zena's pulse spiked. She couldn't make out his face through the visor, but he was looking at her. His fingers twitched at his side. His head tilted, as if considering something. Then he turned away. He didn't say a word. The rest followed. Zena's breath shuddered out of her, weaker than before. They had seen her, and they had chosen to leave her. The realization stung worse than the wound. She was a child, but to them, she was already dead. She lay back against the rubble, her heartbeat slowing. No one was coming. Her eyes fluttered shut. Then, another sound. Not the precise, trained footfalls of soldiers. Heavier, more grounded, human. A shadow moved through the wreckage, a taller, broader figure, wearing battle armor unfamiliar to her. A dull blue visor covered the stranger's face, reflecting the glow of the fires. He stopped beside her, staring down at her small, broken form. Then he dropped to his knee. Sergeant Jack Thompson. His hands moved fast. She barely felt the sting of an injector before warmth spread through her veins. Stabilization drugs. The fog of unconsciousness retreated slightly. She gasped, struggling to make sense of what was happening. He was human. Why was he helping her? Jack reached into his pack, pulling out a small biofoam canister. "Easy, kid," he muttered, his voice gravelly, tired. "Older." He sprayed the foam over her wound, sealing it temporarily. His hands were practiced, confident, moving as if he had done this 1,000 times before. She tried to speak, her lips barely forming words. "Why?" Jack didn't look at her as he checked her vitals. "Because you're still breathing." The war had abandoned her, but the human had not. Zena has been left for dead. Sergeant Jack Thompson refuses to accept that. But saving her means defying orders. And soon, Jack will have to choose between duty and humanity. Sergeant Jack Thompson worked fast. He had seen this kind of injury before. Deep lacerations, internal bleeding, signs of severe trauma. If she had been human, she'd already be dead. Maybe she still would be. He gritted his teeth, tightening the seal on the biofoam. He wasn't losing another one. Zena's small chest rose and fell, her breath shallow but steady. The stabilization drugs were doing their job, but she needed proper medical care, and no one else was coming. Jack tapped his comm unit. "This is Thompson. I've got a wounded child, non-combatant, serious injuries, requesting immediate medevac." The response came fast. "Negative, Sergeant. No retrieval ops authorized in red zones. Civilians are non-priority." His jaw clenched. "Say again, Command." "You're telling me we're just leaving her?" A pause. Then the flat, impersonal reply. "We don't have the resources to secure every casualty. Proceed with your original assignment." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Cold, calculated, just numbers on a screen. Jack looked down at the girl, at Zena. Her violet eyes flickered open, unfocused, barely seeing him. Her breathing hitched as she tried to speak. "They left me," she whispered, voice hoarse. Jack felt something burn in his chest. "Yeah," he muttered. "They did." He could still hear the comms officer in his ear, waiting for confirmation. "Sergeant, acknowledge orders." Jack muted the channel and made his decision. The battlefield was still hot. Jack lifted Zena into his arms, carefully adjusting her so she wouldn't feel the weight of her broken body pressing against him. She barely reacted, too weak to resist, too exhausted to care. He moved fast, keeping low. Enemy patrols still roamed the area, looting whatever supplies they could find. His boots crunched over shattered metal and glass as he wove through the rubble, taking side routes, avoiding main streets where bodies lay abandoned. Every step defied orders. He was supposed to be securing a forward position with his unit, not carrying a dying child through a war zone. His comm buzzed again. Command wasn't going to let this go. "Sergeant Thompson, where the hell are you?" "Captain Ethan Reeves." Jack exhaled slowly before pressing the line open. "Busy, sir." "Busy doing what?" Jack rounded a corner, pressing himself against a crumbling wall as a Zorg patrol passed by, their weapons loose in their hands, their expressions empty. They weren't looking for survivors. They were cleaning up. Jack waited until they disappeared into the wreckage before moving again. "Rescuing a civilian," he finally answered. Reeves's voice sharpened. "That's not your job, Sergeant." Jack adjusted his grip on Zena, keeping his voice level. "Then maybe someone should have made it their job." A long silence. Then, frustration. "You think you can carry her through an active combat zone? Have you lost your damn mind?" "I've got a plan." "Is your plan, get shot in the back, because that's what you're signing up for?" Jack ignored him. He wasn't leaving her. "Sergeant, listen to me." Jack cut the comm. He had bigger problems. The artillery strikes had stopped, but the city was still crumbling. Jack moved through the ruins, keeping his head down as he cut through an abandoned market. Shattered storefronts stood like hollowed-out tombs, their shelves looted long ago. The war had taken everything. Zena shifted slightly in his arms, her small fingers curling weakly into the fabric of his armor. "Hurts," she mumbled. Jack's grip tightened. "I know, kid. Just hold on." She shouldn't have been his problem. He shouldn't have had to make this decision. But someone had to. Ahead, the street opened into a collapsed plaza, the skeletal remains of buildings leaning dangerously over the road. And standing in the middle of it, a group of Zorg civilians, refugees. Jack slowed. Some of them were wounded. A few had makeshift bandages wrapped around their arms, their clothes tattered from weeks, months of running. They weren't soldiers, and one of them broke away from the crowd, stumbling forward. A woman. Her skin was the same pale blue as Zena's. Her eyes, wide with desperation, locked onto the girl in his arms. Jack barely had time to react before she collapsed to her knees. "My daughter." Jack has defied orders. He has chosen to save a life at the cost of his career. And now he has found Zena's mother. But there's still one more choice left to make. Zena's mother collapsed in front of him, her breath ragged, her hands shaking as she reached for the child in his arms. Jack didn't move immediately. His instincts told him to be cautious. He had seen this before: desperation, grief, people clinging to hope that might already be lost. But then her violet eyes locked onto Zena's pale face, and Jack knew. She wasn't faking. She was her mother. "She's alive," Jack said, his voice steady. "But she's not safe yet." The woman let out a breath that sounded like a sob, pressing a trembling hand to Zena's cheek. "My name is Myra," she whispered. "Please, please save her." Jack's grip on Zena tightened. "That's the plan." The Zorg refugees were in bad shape. There were at least 24 of them, mostly women, elderly, and a handful of injured soldiers, stragglers left behind when the front lines moved on. Some sat slumped against the rubble, bandages stained dark, eyes hollow. They had nothing left. One of the soldiers, a grizzled-looking veteran with a plasma rifle slung over his shoulder, narrowed his eyes at Jack. "You're human," he said. Suspicious, accusatory. Jack didn't have time for this. "Glad we established that," he muttered. The soldier's hand twitched toward his weapon. Jack stared him down. "You gonna slow me down with a fight, or are you gonna help me get this kid out of here?" A long pause. Then the soldier exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're insane." Jack already knew that. He turned back to Myra. "I can get her to my people. We have medics, supplies. She'll get the care she needs." The woman looked torn. "You can't take her alone. You'll be killed before you reach your lines." Jack let out a dry laugh. "Lady, I've made it this far. Might as well see how long my luck holds." She grabbed his arm. "Take the others." Jack hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be doing this at all. He had already gone against orders to save one life. Now she was asking him to save dozens. But then Zena stirred in his arms, her fingers curling weakly against his armor. A promise. He looked back at Myra and gave a sharp nod. "All right." We all moved together. The trip back to the Earth Alliance base should have taken 30 minutes. It took 3 hours. Jack led the group through collapsed buildings, sewer tunnels, and back alleys, avoiding patrols and airstrikes that still rattled the shattered remains of the city. Zena was growing weaker. Jack could feel it, the shallow breaths, the faint tremors in her body. "Hang in there, kid," he muttered under his breath. "Almost there." She didn't answer. That scared him more than the gunfire. Halfway through their route, disaster struck. A drone passed overhead, scanning the ruins. Jack froze, pushing Myra and the others into cover. Too late. The drone's red targeting laser locked onto them. A mechanical voice echoed through the streets. "Unregistered movement detected. Engaging suppression protocols." Jack's gut turned to ice. "Run!" The first artillery round detonated behind them, throwing metal and debris in all directions. Jack didn't stop moving. Zena was in his arms, his only priority. He sprinted through the wreckage as more explosions rained down, shaking the ground with every blast. The air filled with dust, smoke, and the screams of those who weren't fast enough. The soldier from earlier shoved a wounded civilian forward, his teeth bared. "Get them out of here!" he shouted. Then he turned, raised his plasma rifle, and fired on the drone. The return fire hit him square in the chest. Jack didn't look back. There was no time to mourn. They made it to an old transit tunnel, the collapsed ceiling providing natural cover. The drone stopped its pursuit, moving on. Jack fell to one knee, breathing hard. His arms were shaking, but Zena was still alive. Myra collapsed beside him, clutching her wounded side. The refugee group had lost 4 people in the attack. 4 too many. Jack clenched his jaw. "We keep moving." No one argued. They didn't have the strength. The Earth Alliance base was only a mile away when Jack's calm crackled to life. "Sergeant Thompson, Captain Ethan Reeves." Jack exhaled sharply. "You're not going to like where I am, sir." "No, I already don't. You've got a goddamn bounty on your head right now." Jack glanced at the wounded civilians behind him, then at Zena, her small frame barely holding on. "Worth it." Reeves cursed over the line. "Tell me you're at least close. 1 click out, but I've got wounded, and a lot of them. A beat of silence. Then, "Get them here. We'll deal with the fallout later." Jack nodded to himself. He wasn't out of the fire yet, but for the first time all day, he saw the way forward. Copy that. Moving in. Jack has made it this far, but now he has to get Zena and the refugees past the base defenses, and command is waiting for him. Jack Thompson ran on fumes. His muscles burned, his armor felt twice as heavy, and every breath came ragged, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. Not when Zena was still breathing. Not when the refugees behind him needed him to keep moving. The Earth Alliance base was in sight, a towering structure of reinforced steel, its gates looming like the entrance to salvation. Automated defense turrets tracked their approach, but Jack had already sent the recognition codes ahead. They wouldn't get shot. At least, not by accident. But the real threat wasn't behind them anymore. It was waiting for him inside. "We need medics at the gate," Jack barked into his comm, barely slowing his pace. The first response team rushed forward, clad in armored field gear. They weren't here for him. They were here for Zena. Dr. Amir Singh, the lead medic, crouched beside Jack as he laid Zena down on a stretcher. His normally calm face tightened the moment he saw the wounds. "She's in critical condition," Singh muttered, running a scanner over her frail body. "Severe blood loss, organ trauma. How the hell is she still alive?" Jack wiped a hand across his sweat-covered face. "Because she's stubborn," he muttered. "Like me." Singh didn't argue. He just nodded to his team. "Move her now. Full stabilization." Jack watched as the medics rushed Zena into the base, disappearing through the reinforced blast doors. He felt the tension in his chest ease. Just a little. She had a chance now. But Jack still had a problem, because Captain Ethan Reeves was already walking toward him. And he didn't look happy. The command office was quiet. Too quiet. Jack stood at attention, his stance rigid, his body still aching from the last few hours. Reeves sat behind his desk, arms folded, staring Jack down with the kind of calm, controlled fury only a career officer could master. "Sit," Reeves said flatly. Jack sat. A long pause. Then, "What the hell were you thinking?" Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. He was too damn tired for this. "That kid was going to die." "I know that," Reeves snapped. "And do you know what else I know? That you disobeyed a direct order, that you abandoned your squad mid-mission, that you risked not only your own life, but the integrity of this entire operation." Jack said nothing, because none of that was wrong. Reeves exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Do you even realize how bad this looks? Command is breathing down my damn neck already, and now I have to explain why one of my best soldiers just threw protocol out the goddamn window." Jack met his gaze without flinching. "I'd do it again." Silence. Reeves's jaw clenched. Of course you would." He leaned back, shaking his head. "Do you even understand what's going to happen next?" Jack did. "Court-martial?" Reeves sighed. "No, I talked them down from that. You're getting a demotion instead." Jack blinked. "Demotion?" "You're damn lucky I like you, Thompson." Jack let out a dry chuckle. "Guess I should be grateful." "Don't push it." A pause. Then Reeves's tone softened. Just a little. "Was she worth it?" Jack thought about Zena, barely holding on. The way her mother begged him to save her. The way Zorg soldiers had walked past her like she wasn't even there. He didn't hesitate. "Yeah." Reeves let out a slow breath. "Then I hope she makes it." Jack stood in the medical bay, watching Zena through the observation window. She was still unconscious, but the monitors beeped steadily. She was stable. Dr. Singh stood beside him, arms crossed. "She's going to make it," Singh said after a moment. "We almost lost her, but you got her here in time." Jack didn't answer. He just nodded, feeling something release in his chest. Singh studied him for a moment. You're different from most of the soldiers I meet, Thompson. Jack let out a tired laugh. Yeah, I get that a lot. Hours later, Jack was about to leave when a small, weak voice stopped him. You stayed. He turned. Zena was awake. Her voice was soft, but there was life in it. Jack stepped closer, offering a small smirk. Course I did, kid. Somebody had to make sure you didn't sleep through all the fun. She smiled. Just a little. Thank you. Jack exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Anytime. He turned to leave. Jack? He paused. She reached into the small medical cot beside her, pulling something from the folds of her blanket. A small metal charm. She held it out to him with trembling fingers. For luck. Jack took it carefully, feeling the cool weight in his palm. He swallowed hard. I'll keep it. And he did, for the rest of his life. Jack broke orders, defied protocol, and lost his rank. But he saved a life, and in the end, that was all that mattered.